As technology has evolved and allowed developers to do more impressive stuff in their games, video games in general have gotten larger and expanded in scope. That's not to say that we didn't have large game worlds until recently, but we certainly have had a lot more of it in the last decade or so. In this 3-part video, we're going to be talking about the 50 biggest maps ever used in video games, and we'll be counting down beginning with number 50. Do keep in mind that though it's natural to assume that when we talk about big maps, we might be talking about open world games only, but that's not the case. Whether it's an open world game or an open-ended game that's not particularly open world, or a huge map that we've seen in multiplayer play, it's all fair game for this list. Also do keep in mind that randomly generated maps were not considered for this feature. A final note before we begin this list, there's every possibility that we might have missed out on some game you were expecting to see on this list, and if we did, it's either because the exact sizes of the maps aren't known to us or we just simply forgot. If it's the former, and you know what the sizes are, please let us know, and if it's the latter, well, please remind us. So without further ado, let's jump in. Assassin's Creed Unity, 2.4 kilometers squared. The open world action by developers Ubisoft has its fair share of issues, sure, but its world is one aspect that can't be faulted much. It's a joy to explore, and it's also pretty big. At about 2.4 kilometers squared, there's more than enough space in this virtual world to explore and lose yourself in. Assassin's Creed Syndicate, 3.7 kilometers squared. Over the last decade or so, Ubisoft has become one of the leading developers of open world games, at least in terms of the number of open world titles that they produce, if nothing else. Assassin's Creed Syndicate's Victorian London boasts an impressive size of 3.7 kilometers squared, which, compared to some of the larger titles in this series, which we'll mention in a bit, actually doesn't seem that big. Assassin's Creed 3, 4 kilometers squared. Naval mechanics have become an integral part of Assassin's Creed over the years, and it was with Assassin's Creed 3 that it all started. It was, however, an ancillary mechanic more than anything else, and the seas themselves didn't account for much of the map. In spite of this, the total map size of Assassin's Creed 3 was decently large, at roughly 4 kilometers squared. Fortnite Battle Royale, 5.5 kilometers squared. A Battle Royale game with a player count of 100 players per match obviously needs a large space in its map, and Fortnite certainly satisfies that demand. At 5.5 kilometers squared, its map is pretty big, and it definitely provides more than enough area for players to treat as their Battle Royale playground. Call of Duty Black Ops 4 Blackout, 7 kilometers squared. For pretty much the same reasons as Fortnite, the map used in Call of Duty Black Ops 4 Battle Royale mode, Blackout, banks on being large, and it does it pretty well. The map, which stitches together both smaller maps that we've seen in the series before as well as some new areas, is 7 kilometers squared in size. Grand Theft Auto 3, 7.7 kilometers squared. The game that started the open world revolution, and perhaps one of the most important games ever made. Even 10 years after its launch, open world titles were struggling to match GTA 3 in several ways, including the size of its world. By today's standard, 7.7 kilometers squared is a decent figure, but in 2001, this was gargantuan. Grand Theft Auto Vice City, 9.6 kilometers squared. Just a year after GTA 3, Rockstar went bigger and better with Vice City, improving upon its predecessor in almost every way possible. The titular Vice City was a completely new setting for the series, one that remains criminally underutilized to this day. But with its impressive size of 9.6 kilometers squared, among several other things, it quickly became a fan favorite. Fallout 4, 10 kilometers squared. Fallout 4 was slightly smaller than the mainline Fallout titles that immediately preceded it, but as mentioned, only slightly so. At 10 kilometers squared, the wasteland of Fallout 4 is pretty big and provides ample room for exploration and discovery. Fallout New Vegas, 10.6 kilometers squared. New Vegas' setting is among the many reasons why people love it so much. The post-apocalyptic desert of Vegas is a constant joy to explore, and at a size of 10.6 kilometers squared, it's also pretty impressive in terms of size. Marvel's Spider-Man, 11 kilometers squared. Though it might not feel like it, given how fast you can travel from one place to another at any time, and how it feels like literally no time has passed while doing so on account of how fun traversal in the game is, thanks to its incredible web swinging, the map in Insomniac's Spider-Man is actually decently sized. The island of Manhattan that serves as the game's setting is 11 kilometers squared in size. Fallout 3, 11.42 kilometers squared. Fallout 3 took this series in a completely new direction, not only going first person, but also open world. And though some veteran fans of the franchise to this day aren't too happy with that change, by and large, it's fair to say that the gamble paid off. The open world especially made a strong impression right out of the gate, especially with its impressive size of 11.42 kilometers squared. Metal Gear Solid 5: The Phantom Pain, 15.5 kilometers squared. A few years ago, it would have been impossible to imagine Metal Gear as an open-world title, but Hideo Kojima does what Hideo Kojima wants. How well the open world was executed and whether or not it required more time in the oven to be fully realized is still up for debate, but there's no denying that the Phantom Pain at least provides a huge sandbox at 15.5 kilometers squared to play around with its systems in. Grand Theft Auto 4, 17.6 kilometers squared. Grand Theft Auto 4 is perhaps one of the most divisive GTA games ever, with its decision to opt for a more grounded tone as compared to the wacky chaos of San Andreas not sitting well with a lot of people. At 17.6 kilometers squared, its world was significantly smaller than San Andreas as well, and is perfectly emblematic of that. LA Noire, 21 kilometers squared. The open world of LA Noire hewed very closely to the kind of open worlds we're used to, at least in terms of structure, but its focus on story, being a historic setting, and playing as an upholder of the law as a cop instead of a person running around wreaking havoc, lent it a unique personality. It was also a pretty large map at 21 kilometers squared. Horizon Zero Dawn, 22 kilometers squared. Horizon Zero Dawn is the first open-world game Guerrilla Games has ever made, but looking at how excellent it is and how beautiful and rich the world is, that is often quite hard to believe. It's also a pretty large world in terms of its size, at approximately 22 kilometers squared. And that about does it for this video. If you enjoyed what you watched and want to see more from GamingBolt, you can always hit that subscribe button and turn on the bell icon next to it. That way you will never miss any of our videos.